I suppose my first question is around, we've been fortunate in Australia, despite GFC, global uncertainty, we've had a solid run of economic growth, consistent over a period of time. One of the downsides of this is that it can lead to complacency. So Jason, I'd love to get your view on how well prepared is Australia for the changes coming in terms of the skills, and how we're doing.
It's a really great question, Julian. Thanks for asking. There's a real disconnect between what industry is feeling versus what society is feeling in Australia. I'll start with the PwC latest CEO survey. And it shares that 80% of CEOs today in Australia are really concerned about the future of work and future of skills. Not having the right skills, but also how do they gear up the current workforce to ensure that they can stay competitively advantaged. And it's almost like a paranoia. And 10 years ago, CEOs weren't concerned about talent. We all know, we've kind of been around. It was like, talent, whatever. They're more focused on the bottom line, top line, around results and so forth. Now, CEOs are more concerned and more focused on talent than they've ever been. But unfortunately, there's a disconnect with society. So earlier this year, we ran a survey across the Asia-Pacific region around the future of skills. We went out to over 4,000 individuals in the APAC region and actually assessed what are they thinking. And across the APAC region, 56% of respondents said they were personally concerned about staying relevant and actually quite dubious about their future. That's across the region. In Australia, there's only 36%. So there's a real disconnect where we're looking at India and Singapore and other markets in Japan. They're much more concerned about their relevance. But individuals in Australia aren't as concerned. And why is that? Well, I think we can hypothesize, but Australia has a little bit more of a laid-back type attitude. And unfortunately, individuals aren't keeping up with learning. But what is fascinating, though, if we compare that to when we're looking at how they're feeling about the type of curriculum, courses, and learning that are being provided in their workforce, 76% of them said that what they were getting provided by industry wasn't good enough. So not only are they, at this point, maybe a little complacent compared to the rest of our peers across the region, they're also saying they're not given the opportunities in their industry. So I see there being two things that can happen there. First is, if CEOs are really concerned about keeping up competitive advantage and talent, what are the learning opportunities they're providing for their employees? And secondly, how are those CEOs educating the workforce today, and we all have a responsibility in industry to educate about the significant changes and the upheaval we're seeing with the fourth industrial revolution.
It's interesting. I'm not surprised by that, because it really doesn't matter how novel or unique your strategy is. If you haven't got the skills in place to implement it, then it's meaningless. Katrina, you talked about people holding on to old models in your presentation. And it's pretty clear that technology is disrupting the creative arts and the way people develop content. But still, the status quo is there, and not just in your industry, in other industries, I'm sure from members of the audience would agree. How do you go about, can you unpack for us in a little bit more detail about how do you get people to challenge the status quo?
I mean, I think it's incredibly challenging. It was interesting, when I was at the ABC, Mark Scott was still director, and he was a really fantastic leader, and he had this really kind of urgent agenda when he was at the ABC around, seeing ahead and understanding that kind of traditional broadcast model was going to be utterly disrupted, and he brought in iView and really kind of transformed how audiences engage with that content. But his big lesson was that he'd been at the SMH before, and he had been in boardrooms, what must be now 15, 18 years ago, and been in conversations where people had said, change is coming, do we need to worry about? No, it'll be fine. And look at what's happened to those newspapers. Yes. I mean, they're a quarter of the thickness that they were, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. And he said it just taught him a lesson of complacency is so dangerous. I mean, you've got to look ahead and understand that everything is changing. I think too, you can't underestimate the importance of direct intervention. In our workplace, and within my kind of environment, which is obviously very specifically around mainly sort of more art house and an experimental art-based content. How do we get people to experiment and play with new platforms that they might not even consider they could have access to? So an example is we've just granted our third commission, where we have an $80,000 commission, which is for visual artists who are working in a gallery-based space. They may do sculpture, they may also do video art or whatever. We've invited them to create a work in virtual reality. It's something that practitioners would have never considered before, but they've gone into that space. They've done it really successfully. So Christian Thompson made one, Joan Ross made one. They're going on to exhibit that work all over, and it's changing the conversation. So I think, of course, there are large kind of government policies that need to be put in place. Obviously, the education, tertiary sector is absolutely critical, and I would say primary and secondary sector as well, in terms of, readying up that next generation. But also, I think we shouldn't underestimate those sort of small interventions that are sort of like create a ripple effect, that change the conversation, change minds, and show through best practice opportunities that other people can pursue.
And I know that Mark Scott, who I know quite well, said also it's about how you define your competitor. So, News Limited and Fairfax really looked at each other as the competitor and not Yahoo News, Google News, and all the digital platforms.
Absolutely.
Martin, you finished your presentation with that great quote, Amara's Law, but you didn't get a chance to really explore how it applies to our sector, higher education. Would you be able to do that now?
Yeah, and it really builds on the back of what my co-presenters and panelists had here today. And can I just thank you for your time and giving to RMIT today? Yeah. So much appreciated. Another round of applause for them for being with us today. Julie, every day when I drive into work, I spot the license plates in front of me, and many of them still have Victoria, the education state, on it. And I'm really struck by that, because we are very proud and very dependent on education as a part of our economy and communities. It's something we do really well here. And yet, what I'm struck by, Julie, is how little in my sector, when I'm together with the other vice-chancellors, we talk about disruption and innovation. Clay Christensen, the really famous professor from Harvard who wrote a book on disruptive innovation, he said, the new entrant nearly always wins. And the reason why the new entrant nearly always wins is because they look at the world where the world is now and going, rather than being trapped in their business model or their ways of working of today. And trust me, I've worked for companies that at one stage, Novell's a great one, we had 85% of the network operating system share in the world. We had these palaces all over the world, neon signs. But we were completely outdone by the new entrant because we were trapped in our way of thinking and didn't really embrace the internet the way that we needed to. So for higher education, my big fear is 2012 was a really pivotal year. These things arrived called MOOCs, massive open online courses. They had the best university brands in the world giving away short courses through platforms that I spoke about before, Coursera and edX and FutureLearn, etc. And all of the headlines came out. The university is dead. The university is going away. The university has no place. So all of my contemporaries got to 2013 and looked around and said, well, we're all still here. Nothing to worry about. Back to business as usual. And that's the peril of Amara's Law. We overestimated the disruption in the short term, but meanwhile, it's bubbling along behind the scenes. And what I'm really worried about is that if we don't have the courage to disrupt ourselves and reinvent ourselves, I don't know who those new entrants are going to be, but somebody's going to invent a better model. And whether we like it or not, people are going to move to that other model because it will serve them better and it will help them live the lives that they want to lead a bit better. And quite frankly, we've been here since 1887 as RMIT. I'll be darned if I let RMIT be disrupted by a new entrant, because we've always changed as Melbourne and Victoria and Vietnam have needed us, and that's our challenge now.
And that relates to that open mindset that you spoke about in your presentation. We've got some questions coming in from Soapbox now. The first one reads, future jobs are unknown, CVs are losing credibility, and competition is high. How do I actually get employed?
What an awesome question, Jason.
Happy to hear off.
Yeah.
Thank you. actually, Claire?
That's called the flick pass.
No. It's no different to how I relate back to my 8-year-old daughter who wants to be a vet. First and foremost, focus on the soft skills, human skills. Martin played a fantastic video of that young man out there who was an introvert. And what he didn't have was the capability of marketing himself, going out and finding that job. Anybody can learn what they call a hard skill. We know the average shelf life is less than 5 years if you read the latest Burson report. Focused on the soft skills. How do you communicate? How do you collaborate? Do you have resilience? Have you ever had a hard knock? Can you pick yourself up back again and go, I've got a growth mindset, I'm going to try again, I'm going to do better. For me personally, this is the lessons I'm teaching my daughter, and also at LinkedIn, the lessons that we teach our teams as well in regards to they're the most important skills you can develop because they'll help you actually get the hard skills that you need.
It's interesting. I was having a conversation with a colleague the other day who was talking about where you kind of sit in the hierarchy and how important it is of who you're reporting to and so on. And I thought about it and I thought, I've never hired somebody on the basis of where they sit in the hierarchy and who they report to. I've hired them on the basis of the chemistry and the sort of collaboration, potential for collaboration that we create in an interview context, and they get to the interview based on projects and things that they have conceived or driven or delivered successfully that show out-of-the-box thinking, that show the ability to deliver partnerships, creative solutions. You know, that's what I employ for.
Yeah. So it's that portfolio of skills that you can demonstrate. And I know several years ago I was looking for a person that had a real perseverance, you know, and was able to consistently focus on solving a problem, and eventually hired somebody who'd been out of the workplace for a number of years, but they'd managed a household and done a whole lot of things, and really it was about perseverance and lots of different ways to assess that rather than that line on the CV.
And I think it's really important. I think it's really important to just realise the world we live in now. We live in a rich media world. You know, that the CV is sort of like a Word document. Why would you think that's going to get cut through? That portfolio needs to be rendered in really magical digital ways that come to life. Something that could be really quite confronting for people in the room. But imagine putting together your story in 90 seconds or less to camera, and that being part of your LinkedIn profile. So that if somebody's looking at you, you can tell your story, your whole story, the power of storytelling as to who you are, what's important to you in life, and what you can contribute in 90 seconds. Now, you might not get it right the first, second, third, fourth time, but wow, if that's the anchor point in your portfolio and you surround it with the formal and informal markers of your life story, that's the way you're going to get the cut through. That's the way you're going to get the interview. That's the way you're going to get into your dream job. And as Jason said, what's awesome now is all the data analytics that can sit behind that to help you put that story together.
And we do that. We do elevator pitches as part of the study at RMIT. We've got another question that comes in. It looks like it's from a staff member. How would you suggest those of us that are keen to embrace innovative approaches and bring these to our students, kick our colleagues in the bum and get them involved? So I think Martin, I'll point this one to you, but I think it's relevant outside RMIT as well. It applies to other industries who you're trying to motivate and include your colleagues who may not have an appetite for experimentation.
So firstly, our Executive Director of Human Resources, Ali, is in the room, and we would never condone or endorse any type of bottom kicking at RMIT, just to make sure that's clear. But I do get the underlying sentiment. You know, about 3 years ago, to my great amazement, there was a headline in the education section in The Australian from another Vice-Chancellor from another state. You won't get any more out of me than that. And he said, I've passed this decree, there will be no more lectures in our university. And I thought, this is interesting. I wonder how much investment he is making in all of his academic community behind the scenes to help them adjust their content, their pedagogy, and their mechanisms to be able to make that transition. And to my great, I guess I wasn't shocked, I sort of expected it, but what I found was that there was precious little behind it. Shame on us to expect that any human being will naturally embrace something new unless we invest in them to help them make that transition, hold their hand, be their guide, and work with them along the way. So one of the things that I'm really proud of at RMIT is we're not adopting their playbook. We've rolled out some amazing technology. We've started RMIT Studios. We're investing heavily in a team of people to help our academic community go on that journey, because you know what, Julie? These are not easy concepts to master. You don't just wake up one day and suddenly become an expert in the ability to teach differently using different tools. My degree is in adult education, and I spent 4 years of my life understanding pedagogical approaches that were built for classroom teaching. Do I think for a second that I can just apply those into blended modes without help? No. Instead of bum kicking, what we need to do is hand holding, and that's why I'm proud we're doing that at RMIT.
Yeah, and that capability build is so important. Did you want to say anything there, Jason?
I do,
You seem
actually.
to.
Yeah, I'm loving this subject because I'm a big believer you have to lead from the front. And we have a term in the technology industry called money ballers, that you find someone who's really great at what they do, the impact that they have on others, and you showcase. It's not about bum kicking for those that are lagging behind. It's about inspiring. And as a leader or as an individual in the organisation, you have the ability to inspire others through change. Change is hard. Let's face it, we spoke about unlearning before. As a Gen X, I'm wired a certain way, and you learn and you get on with it and you make it happen, and unlearning is challenging. But if you can have a few money ballers in your organisation that can actually lead that disruption without actually being overly confronting with it, then people follow, because they also want to be great. They just don't know how to do that.
Yeah. And you let go of DOS. What a good call that was.
I did love DOS.
We'll get together
We'll talk later. We
afterwards.
can reminisce. Yeah.
You have a DOS fest later. Another question that's come in, this is our final question. What do the panellists think their next job will be? Though I think, Martin, you said that you're going to spend all of the kids' inheritance and go skiing. Do they think they have a job that doesn't exist? Katrina?
I think I'm pretty traditional, actually. I think I'm going to stay in the arts, and I think probably I'm loving working in museums, so I think I'll stay in the kind of running a building and a sort of whole little world, a little fiefdom kind of realm. I mean, what I don't have no ability to learn at this point in my life is code. And I'm trying to encourage my sons to.
We can help you with that.
Well, we're coming to the RMIT Open Day. I tell you.
We can help as well. So
Thank you.
We're better.
Thank you, guys.
Come on, really.
RMIT online. We've got digital blocks, module blocks for you.
But
I'll send you a playlist later, okay?
I mean, the importance of understanding code. I'm even seeing in my workplace. We're doing this big $40 million transformation at the moment. And technology and a really creative use of technology being embedded in the sort of heart of how we work together, but how we engage with our audiences during their visit and when they leave is just it's going to transform how we engage with our visitors and how we increase our kind of reach and impact and public value. So much of it is about code. And younger, I mean, the person leading it is Seb, who's not young. I mean, he's mid-40s, but he's unusual, and he's come to it.
That's very young.
And he's come to it because he was an electronic musician. That's how he's learnt about code. I mean, I just think cross-disciplinary collaboration is so key to all of this. But I don't know enough about code to move into the sort of areas that we haven't thought of before. But that is just such a core skill.
Great. What about you, Jason?
Well, I got my first job when I was 14 years and 9 months, because back then in the day in Victoria, that's when you could get your first job. And I worked at McDonald's. And I was fortunate enough that I studied on and I actually became a manager there. And I was also delivering pizzas when I was 18 and got my licence in Noble Park, if anybody's from Victoria, which most of you are, obviously. And then went on and actually studied hotel management. And my first career was hotel management. Fast forward 30 years, I could not have predicted that here I am on stage talking to you today about the future of skills and work. And I feel privileged. So in another 30 years, when I'm in my 70s, and late 70s, I can guarantee I'll still be working. And it'll be something that'll be maybe totally different from what I imagine now. But there's one thing that stays true, that life is fluid and you need to continue to grow and learn new skills. And across my career, I've done that. But what do I imagine myself doing? Actually, something in the education sector. I've been so inspired specifically around the field I'm in now that, in my late 40s, it's time to start giving back. And I'd love to give back to society the way that I've learnt over the years to actually help Victoria and Australia grow.
Okay.
You think you couldn't have predicted, if you'd seen my first year grades at uni, there's no way you'd think I'd be a Vice Chancellor, let me tell you that, for nothing. Holy dooly. Thank goodness they weren't digitised so nobody could get their hands on them. At least that's my great hope. So, I say quite publicly, Julie, that this is my last, what I call a big gig as a chief executive, but it will be a new job because it doesn't exist yet, but I'm going to apply my thinking around the disruption of education and turn it to where I think it needs to do its greatest good at the moment, which you touched on in your presentation, which is how do you drive this thinking around portfolio and micro-credentials down into sort of year 9 and above?
Yeah.
How do we actually help people stop wasting 2 or 3 years of their life and start investing in their future for themselves and their families, and help universities do a better job, because we inherit just this new cadre of young people to help us do what we do.
Well, what is really clear is that we're going to be sharing our workspaces with robots and bots and artificial intelligence. So to stay ahead of the curve, we've got to invest in lifelong learning and make sure that our skills are aligned with what is needed in the market and the jobs of the future. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in thanking the panel